All right, I'd like to introduce the moderator for the next panel. And this time we're going to be focusing...
Everyone, please, we need to start the panel. Please come back to your seats. Thank you very much. Our panelists are ready. They're waiting. Some of them have flights to catch. In fact, one or two of them have had to leave because they, we're running out of time. So please, let's continue the show. Over to you.
All right, so our next panel will be on Rethinking Finance, Philanthropy, and Diaspora Investments.
Please have
in
a seat,
Africa.
everyone.
And I would like to introduce again co-founder of Africa Policy Conversations, Jackie Ugokwe, to moderate this panel. Jackie? A round of applause for her, please. Thank you. I think I'll be more generous. I know it's been a long day. Thank you so much. We also have joining us for this panel the Director of Foundation Operations at MGHS Foundation, Chinwe Egonu. A round of applause for her. She's already here. And I can see we have other panelists here as well. The Vice Chair of the International Sustainability Standard Board, Mr. Jidong Hua, is also here. A round of applause for him. Sorry? Okay. All right, do we have Clayton Banks in the room? Okay, Clayton is here. Please, a round of applause for him, the CEO of Silicon Harlem. Next to C is a partner, O'Melveny and Myers Foundation, Niger We Can. A round of applause for him as well. Thank you very much. Do we have Mitch Brooks in the room as well? Okay, he's left. Okay, great. Right. Wangari, is she here? Yes. Wangari is here. Okay. Yes, I do understand. The Managing Director and Public Finance Management Specialist, Enterprise Global, Wangari Mukai is here. Yes, there she is. Please a round of applause for her. All right. And so on that note, I'll hand over to Jackie.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I know it's been a long day of sessions, an engaging conversation, but I think this panel will be my personal favorite, and I'm not biased because I'm moderating. But however, this particular panel really is about refinancing, thinking about philanthropy, and thinking about how the diaspora can be more involved and to getting money back to the continent. And so I'm going to allow my panelists to introduce themselves very quickly. We do have a panelist who actually has a flight to catch, so I'm going to allow him to go first, and he may have to just jump really quickly, but I'm going to start all the way from my left side here, and we're just going to go in order. So feel free to go ahead, introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's show some Niger spirit. My name is Jingdong Hua. I'm the Vice Chair of the International Sustainability Standard Board, but I started my career 30 years ago in Abidjan for the African Bank. Traveled in Africa extensively over the past 30 years. Very proud to have led many African local currency bonds, the first ever Niger bond, Zambia Kwacha bond, Rwandan franc bond, South African green bond. So I'm going to talk about finance.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chinwe Egonu. I'm the I'm the Director of Operations for MJHS Foundation. MJHS is a nonprofit organization that provides healthcare services to people in New York City. They provide hospice and palliative care, home care, rehab, and I work in the foundation, so I help raise philanthropic dollars for their programs and services. And MJHS has been in business for 100 years. So I'm bringing a nonprofit philanthropic fundraising perspective to this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Wangari Mwekia. I am a public finance management specialist, and I run a consulting firm called Expertise Global. And in Expertise Global, we advise government on how best to use their finances to maximize service delivery for citizens and households and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My turn.
Yes, it is.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, thanks. Thank God. I'm a tech guy. I didn't even hit the thing right. My name is Clayton Banks. I feel like I have an accent in here. But it's just great to be here. I'm the CEO and founder of Silicon Harlem. And I look forward to having this conversation because we've been able to attract over $100 million into Upper Manhattan. And I will tell you exactly how we did it. Everybody over there by the door, do you hear what I just said?
Everyone in the corner.
$100 million? Wake up!
Everybody in the corner, if you could take a seat, please. Thank you very, very much.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nexus C. It's certainly a privilege to be here. I'm a partner at O'Melveny & Myers, so my day job, I'm a litigator and trial lawyer, but I'm here because I'm also the founder of Naija We Can. And Naija We Can leverages the Naija spirit of the diaspora. It's a 527 political organization. Prior to the last election in 2023, the Nigerian presidential elections, we decided to create an organization that can serve as a vehicle for the diaspora to get involved. A lot of people want to find a way to pick the right candidates, have the right people in office, and reduce the delta between good candidates that they believe in, the financial delta between good candidates they believe in, and others that either use government resources or financing from questionable means to find their ways in power. And so we use technology, mobile, online, and allow folks in the diaspora to donate. And we raised a good amount of money this last election, and I'm here to talk about that.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. I'm going to jump really quickly to my first panelist, Dong, because you have to leave. And you mentioned that you're here to discuss more about financing. I think one of the good questions, and one that I've even heard even from the crowd as I was talking to a few people, is how can funding from Africans in the diaspora be leveraged to drive economic growth on the continent?
Well, thank you very much, Jackie. So my last job, I was treasurer of the World Bank, and before that, I was treasurer of the International Finance Corporation. So before I answer your question, I want to tell you a story. 2013, I led a team that issued the first ever IFC AAA Zambia Kwacha bond. And we wanted to use this local currency bond to finance microfinance organizations in Zambia. But when I said to the CEO of the local microfinancier, said, why don't you take the loan in local currency? You know what he said? I rather get your dollar loan because your dollar loan is cheaper in nominal interest rate. Mind you, in 2013, $1 is about 5 or 6 Zambia Kwacha. But we told him, look, you are on lending to SMEs, and they work locally. They generate Kwacha revenue. If you lend them dollars, and with the volatility, you don't know what's going to happen because the currency you borrow and currency you generate are different. So he agreed. 3 years later, he couldn't thank us enough because the Zambia Kwacha went from 5 to 10. And now it's 1 to 20. Meaning that if you had borrowed what you thought would be a cheap local foreign currency loan, it turned out to be more expensive, right? So what I'm reflecting is that whether it's the World Bank, African Bank, all the global lenders who are lending dollars, they meant well. But if the source of generation of revenue is in local currency, I certainly think we should, from a public policy point of view, think more of local currency. This is where diaspora comes in, because when I issued the first Naija bond in Nigeria with my good sister Aruma Altay, the chairman of the Nigerian SEC, part of the buyers were from the diaspora, from the United States, right? So how can the diaspora, and it's a local currency, Nigeria Naira loan, bond with a 9% coupon, right? So you earn a high coupon, you have a good return, you are supporting local entrepreneurs that generate local currency, but you protect them so that they are not vulnerable to the volatility of the currency. Let me just say second thing, because my current job, otherwise I would be fired. That is, last year, just before COP27, I sat down with Finance Minister, my good friend Zainab Ahmed of Nigeria, because what we are doing in the International Sustainability Standard Board is to introduce the first global standard so that companies can disclose sustainability matters. And Finance Minister Ahmed immediately said Nigeria will be an early adopter, recognizing if Nigerian companies now, in addition to disclosing their financial returns, they can now reveal their good story on sustainability, because the carbon emission in Africa is actually less than somewhere else, right? So that would attract global investment. So I just wanted to say, check out our website, ifrs.org. And Nigeria is actually the first Africa country that has officially committed at COP27 to adopt this standard. So Nigerian company from Dangote to MTN to others, will be on par with a lot of companies from developed countries in terms of a global disclosure standard to attract global investment. So I know my time is up, but thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know I appreciate you taking the time, even though we're running over and you've taken time and you have a flight to catch, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to move on to sort of the slightly other portion of the conversation around philanthropy. And I'm going to move this on to Chinwe, our next panelist. As we think about philanthropy, we understand that it plays a vital role in meeting development challenges and mitigating crises in sub-Saharan Africa. But is there really a culture of philanthropy? And how do we actually promote that culture of philanthropy, both home and abroad?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I have no grim statistics. I've done my research, and I know that a culture of philanthropy already exists on the continent, right? We have nonprofits that receive donations for programs and services. We have crowdfunding is going on right now. We have people receiving grants, people making grants. Family foundations exist. We know that companies have what we call the corporate social responsibilities, the CSRs, where they are mandated to provide social and environmental assistance to people in the community where they serve. I know there's an oil and gas industry act in Nigeria that mandates that oil and gas companies set aside 3% of their annual operating expense, put it into a trust managed by the board that go into their CSR programs. And then I know that there are companies that really go above and beyond the CSR. So they provide electricity in form of solar. They provide electricity through solar power. They provide water. They build infrastructure. They have health fairs. They have job fairs. And a company, since we have to try and look inward first, a company that comes to mind is a company called Energia. Energia has a very strong CSR program. If you go on their website, you'll see it. So they are going above their 3% mandate, and they are doing much more for the community. The other thing I want to, as we talk about a culture of philanthropy, let's look at the stakeholders within each organization. Are you engaging them in a culture of fundraising and philanthropy? Do you have annual employee giving campaigns? Do you mandate your board? So let's start at the top. Do your board members have an annual financial requirement where they make contributions towards social and environmental programs? Are your contractors, your business partners, are they involved? Are your staff members involved? Can they be involved in food drives? Can they be involved in health drives? So that culture of philanthropy has to start somewhere. It has to start in a structured place like an organization. The other thing I would like to recommend is for corporations and businesses to start partnering with local nonprofits within the communities, because these nonprofits already provide those social programs and services, start to partner with them. Can you start what we call a junior board? Bring in young people. You can call them a junior board. You can call them an executive young person's council. Bring them together. Give these young people a seat at the table. They'll be ambassadors. At the same time, you're also preparing the next set of philanthropists, the next set of leaders. Another thing that could happen is the company, in conjunction with some internal stakeholders and some external stakeholders, form what we call a women's council as a way to get women in the community involved in fundraising. So all these little discussions, all these little initiatives somehow start that culture of philanthropy. Also, at the I'm in the nonprofit world, in the nonprofit fundraising world. I could go on. There's really so much I could unpack right now, but let's start that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna slide over to my next panelist here and kind of go through a little bit more about financing. And I think the points made about philanthropy are great, and I think that's just one sort of aspect of it. What are some of the various alternative sources of finance that exist, to support impact investing, maybe even to empower women and youth-based businesses on the continent? Do you have some ideas, some tips that you can share with us?
Well, thank you. I think really the answer to that question is even more around how can we improve what we already have in terms of the systems and the processes. So even in terms of how we attract financing, how we package, how businesses package, how they, their value propositions and how they attract financing. Those could really stand to have some improvements. And also, I think even understanding how things work on the ground, because I think largely we tend to try to emulate what is happening in developed countries and those structures that happen in developed countries, whereas in many African countries, there are different ways in which people raise revenues. And sometimes they happen at the macro scale. We were talking about philanthropy. When we think about philanthropy, we think about the big business owners in America and in Europe, et cetera, in Asia. But I was thinking about this and I was reflecting on this question, and I was thinking, when I first came to the States, I remember I was coming to do a course called the International Baccalaureate, and my father couldn't afford to send me to the States. I would buy the ticket and all that, and my family couldn't. And what we did is, what was typical that happens in Kenya is that you get a bunch of people around the table, you go to a hotel or whatever, and then you raise money from your friends and family. And this is a very common way in which people raise finances for their education and other important things. And I was thinking, this could be an idea that could be applied. Think about micro-investing in a sense and saying, I have this great business idea, get people around the table and see if you can raise that money or create a platform through which people can then, go through various ideas and micro-invest, right? So I think there are ways in which we can adapt what we already know how to do and how to do well, and take it to the next level, digitize it or open it to a larger cohort of people who could invest.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think your points are very valid. As I had mentioned in the earlier parts of this, my name is Jackie Ogokwe. I don't think I got the full intro in the beginning, but currently during my day job, I actually work for, I guess, arguably one of the biggest private-run foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I've seen the power of philanthropy, basically change lives, right? And we've kind of watched through the various sectors, whether it be health, whether it be agriculture, whether it be climate, to really, really sort of push the needle on innovation. And I think, sort of moving into my next panelist here, Clayton, I think one of the questions I'm very curious about, or would like, for you to share some answers on, as we think of funding, whether it be philanthropy, whether it be impact investing, whatever that may look like, what are some of the tools and tactics we can use to help, sort of if we go with SDG 1, right, like eliminating poverty, or at least bringing that down to a level where it's not as, impactful? How do we break some of those generational cycles, that's plaguing, one, the continent, and on a global scale as well?
I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. I think one that we have to start, hopefully today, is we start speaking a little bit different. I've heard some of the same things like for many, many years, and I like your question because it begs us to say, can we change our language a little bit, right? It really comes down to, in my opinion anyway, I worked very hard in my life. I went to the best schools. I worked really hard, made a lot of money, and I was really focused a lot on me. When I worked with President Clinton of the United States, I did a project with him, and it was about getting kids to college, particularly Hispanic kids and black kids. That was such an impact. He went on CNN and talked about it. He talked about it all over the place. And we got a lot of kids in college. That, in my opinion, was much more gratifying than all the hard work I did. And it turned out that it actually created more money. And it's in his library right now. If you ever go to his library, I'm in it. I'm also in the United States Library of Congress. These were things because I was doing stuff when I changed my mind from how much I was trying to just get as much money as I possibly could, but focused on how do I create new language which talked about impact. How do we become more thinking about humanity? And this is all about SDGs, to your point. So I'm just going to suggest, because I don't want to be long-winded here, but I will say that there's an opportunity now to truly meet that phrase that I've heard and I love and I feel I'm one, which is to be a global citizen. And when you think of it that way, you actually have a time, you have make more money for everybody. It raises the entire community and the cities, the states, the countries, even a continent.
Thank you very much. You can clap. That's good to clap.
A little bit louder, please. I'm just kidding.
And as I go into my next question with my next panelist, you mentioned, early on in your introduction, some successful campaigns and things that you've done. I think it'd be great to hear a little bit more about some of the success stories that you've heard. I think, far too many times we hear about all the issues and the things that have gone wrong. What are some of the successes that you've seen in the work that you've done?
Sure. I'll start with a question to the audience. How many folks consider themselves a member of the African diasporas? Show of hands. All right. And of those who consider yourself a member of the African diaspora, how many have donated to a campaign on the continent? Okay, fewer hands. So our success story is trying to get more hands raised in that regard. We found that so many of us here in the diaspora, excellent professionals, we do well in corporate America, we've got mayors in this country, we've got congressmen and women in this country, but when it comes to leadership on the continent, it seems like we're lacking. And so our goal for Naija We Can was how can we galvanize our voices in the diaspora, make some good noise, make a lot of noise, and have small donations to large donations to support candidates that we believe can be transformational. We were very inspired by the recent 2022 Electoral Act in Nigeria that promised freer and fairer elections, and we wanted to do something about it and not just sit by the sidelines. And we knew that pooling money together wasn't necessarily the source. We wanted to do it the right way. So we created this 527 organization, which allows you to pool money together tax-free. We examined the laws in the country and found that individuals can donate funds to individual candidates in Nigeria as long as it doesn't exceed 50 million naira. And we tried to make sure that we had a way that folks sitting right here in New York or anywhere across the country, across the world, quite frankly, could donate to a candidate of their choice. Our candidate that we supported was the candidate for the Labour Party. In the last presidential election, we had donations from the Ukraine, from Ireland, from the UK, from the United States, all across the world donating on their mobile phones for this political cause. Campaigns are very expensive, as many of you know. If anyone's been involved in a campaign, you've got to pay for transportation, for the microphones, for food, for banners. And oftentimes, what keeps good candidates out of the political space in Africa is finance. And we wanted to see if we can solve that problem, and we've had some success in doing so.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And similar to the last panel, I want to keep this very interactive and looking to the crowd now for any questions that you may have for our panelists. Feel free to put your hand, oh, we have a hand up right at the back right here. Put your hand up and the microphone will get to you in a second. We have one right here.
Thank you. My name is Nota. I'm from South Africa. And I heard you speak about donating to campaigns in Nigeria from all over the diaspora. My position is that democracy doesn't happen every 4 or 5 years when there's an election cycle. And what you said about working within the laws of whatever country that you're trying to support to have democratic reforms doesn't really satisfy me, because we already know that the incumbents are the policymakers and the lawmakers in those countries, so they structure the laws in a way in which they can benefit from, either voter apathy or, a dejected public that feels like the laws are not in their favor. You say you're a litigator, and I would like to know how keen are you in clubbing together with other litigators who've got an affinity for, improving the condition of African people to actually fight litigation cases, to fight for different laws or to fight for law reform on the African continent and actually raise funds for that as opposed to raising funds for political campaigns? Thank you.
Thank you. Feel free, yeah.
Excellent question and very important. In fact, I was just at an event a couple of days ago put together by Appleseed, which is a nonprofit, and they have the Attorneys General Alliance. And what they do is they gather African attorneys generals from across the continent to speak exactly to that, get together to talk about policy initiatives, policy changes, things that we can do differently on the continent. You noted elections are every 4 years, and we recognize that. The benefit of having a 527 nonprofit is that you can donate the funds that are pooled to any cause as long as it advances good governance. So we've donated to the campaign, but we also support other organizations. We'd love to partner with Yaga Africa, for example, and all the great work that they're doing with voter education and ensuring that we have a population that know their rights and are excited about the prospect of leadership. So there's a lot that you can do beyond elections. I think that the key here, and the reason why I was very excited to speak to you all, is that what we did with Niger We Can, you all can do the same thing. We all can do the same thing. I think the more of us in the diaspora that get involved and pool our resources, the better it will be in terms of candidates that we want to have in office. There is $3 billion or so in diaspora remittances to Nigeria. If we just get 1% of that, which is $30 million, I believe, I think it's now $1 naira, unfortunately, to $1 to 1,000 naira now. So that's about 30 billion naira that could impact a campaign. That can change a campaign, the direction of it. We've got folks who've been in office in Nigeria, supported politicians here. They can tell you. So I do hope that the message that is sent across is that we all need to do more. We can do more, and there are vehicles that allow us to do so.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? Okay, going once, going twice. Oh, there we go, right here. Your mic's right behind you.
Hello, my name is Shuruk. I'm from Egypt. I was just talking to my colleague about how Africa is a very rich continent with very much resources. But like speaking from Egypt, I can't speak for every African country. Our government is corrupt, and like we cannot really like utilize these resources. So how can we shift like instead of like donating and everything, how can we shift our focus to making use and utilizing the resources that we have in our continent? Yeah, that's it.
Maybe I could respond to that briefly, and even just linking to what the first gentleman said about the bonds. I think diaspora bonds are, I'll come to your question, but diaspora bonds are a really compelling offer. But the challenge is around the questions that that everybody asks ourselves when they're investing in an economy that is perceived as weak, right? So if you're looking at, you know, how does a government use the resources that it has? Yeah, how does it? What's the transparency? You know, the Transparency International has an index to show, you know, the doing business index, the transparency index, and if those are not showing good numbers when it comes to how to manage risk, then it becomes difficult even for the diaspora, who are committed and invested in the country, to then also now invest in diaspora bonds. So it was mentioned, I think, remittances last year, or was it the year before, was about $25 billion. And it was mentioned, I think, earlier that remittances to Nigeria is about $3 billion. But I think the last time Nigeria tried to do a diaspora bond, they raised $300 billion, which is very impressive, but a drop in the ocean when it comes to the potential, right? So that speaks to how the risk, even for people who are from the country, perceive from that continent, and they prefer to send the money directly to their siblings or their family for various things. So thinking about the corruption and thinking about how do we then improve the institutions that show us how the money is being used, and what say do we as citizens, both locally and in the diaspora, how we engaged in that process. And if you look at what I know, that a lot of discussion is around Nigeria, and you know, in a lot of ways, Nigeria is kind of the ambassador of Africa. Whenever I go somewhere, they're like, you know, talking about Nigeria, and I think that's a very important role that Nigeria plays in the various ways that it does. When I'm thinking about Kenya, we had a new president that came in last year, and he had his first budget this year. And it was a budget that went against a lot of the campaign promises that he gave. And the citizens were really holding him to account, right? So they were saying, this is what you said, because you know everybody has a phone these days. They said, you know, you said this, you said you're not going to increase taxes, but you've increased taxes. You said you're going to not remove the fuel subsidy, but you remove the fuel subsidy. And so the cost of living has skyrocketed. And so now people are actually matching, you know, this is what you've put in your budget. You said you're going to spend X amount in education, you're going to spend X amount in health, you're going to spend X amount in water, and this is the finances you're trying to raise. This is a history of what budgeting has provided. The citizens are now starting to match that, which is something I've never seen before happening in Kenya, and something that I'm very excited that as I look at democracies like in the US, where people actually hold their elected officials to account. They say, you know, you said this, I'm going to call, you know, I always hear that I'm going to call my, you know, whoever, legislator to complain, and, you know, you can do that. And I see that a lot of African countries, especially where I'm from in Kenya, that they are starting to get to that point where we're holding them to account. So I think once we start getting that, we start getting information, we start being really involved in the process, I think we'll start to see some dividends from that.
Yeah, feel free to add.
I'd also like to add that people on the continent should start looking at family foundations that exist in the continent. We have thousands and thousands of family foundations that do great work. A good example, a good module is the Tony Lumelu Foundation. They provide entrepreneurial grants to young people throughout the continent. They have mentorship programs, they have trainings. So maybe if there's a way to create like an online directory of all foundations, all family foundations that exist on the continent, so that grantees can access it. This compilation will have every single foundation, what they fund, their grant cycle, who the grant manager is, if an LOI is required, if a proposal is required. And this has to be accessible to people who need that funding. So an online directory of all foundations, all family foundations on the continent for the continent. Thank you.
So, what you're saying is that doesn't exist at the moment.
I don't know.
Okay, well, that's a business idea, everyone, right? Like creating this database of, organizations, foundations across the continent. Where's Shanae in the room? Africa Policy Conversations. Hey, maybe that's our next project. But with us getting very close to the end of this session, I wanted to take the time for each of our panelists to just give us some closing thoughts. I think one thing I would like you to share is, what is your bright spot for Africa? What do you see as, sort of the hope, and what is kind of that next step that everyone should be looking towards? And yeah, I'll start with Nexus because we're
before. Can I just throw in a quick question?
Okay, we got a question.
Well, it's online.
Okay.
The Niger Weekend. Someone is asking if there's a website.
Oh, good question.
Yes, great question. I was torn whether I should put out the shameless plug or not, but I'm plugging since I've got permission here. You can go to nigerweekend.org and you can check out the website, and feel free to donate if you'd like to.
Fantastic, and you can go.
Niger Weekend, so NAIJAWECAN. Niger Weekend.
Fantastic.
It's a double entendre, actually. All right, so in terms of bright spots, someone mentioned the End SARS movement earlier in one of the panels, and I'm very inspired by the young people of Africa. I'm very inspired by just listening in this room, all the different founders and ideas that we're hearing. My hope for Africa is that these young people ultimately take over the reins. I think one of the questions from the audience was about corruption. I think that the real issue we have in Africa is the lack of accountability. And one of the ways we can hold our leaders accountable as members of the diaspora is through finding ways to support leaders that we believe represent us. We do that all the time in the United States, in our various countries. We put money into the Democratic Party, Republican Party, the Green Party, if that's the party you support. But we seem to talk a lot about what's going wrong in Africa, but we're not doing a lot in terms of getting into the political economy and funding candidates. And so very excited about what I saw in this last election, the number of participations, people using their own resources to support a candidate that seemed like a long shot. It didn't cross the finish line, but got very close to it, and that's what inspires me.
Thank you.
So I am going to share just a quick 5 things we've talked about before, and maybe some of you have heard it before, but definitely want to do it one more time. And I'll start with electives. So one of the things that I look at is put together, whether you're in a city, whether you're in Egypt, wherever you are, there's 5 things you ought to do. Start writing this down, by the way. You might want to write this down, seriously. So it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem. One of them is the electives. They speak about laws. They speak about how they can improve a neighborhood and all these type of things. They have a reason why they're in that position. Good language. Second one is your universities in your area, schools that are in your area. That's where the brain trust is, so you want to have that voice. With me so far? Number 3, you're also going to want to have the private sector, private companies that can actually help you financially and all types of other things that come with that. The 4th one are your nonprofits in your area, whether it's in our world, that's like Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs and all these different types of things that are serving people every single day. And the number 5, is the public in general. Walk the streets, talk to the people, see what's going on. What are they talking about? If you can get all 5 voices to the table, the interesting part is they don't know how to speak to each other. But if you sit in the middle of that wheel, you obviously now have an opportunity to create an ecosystem that can not only bring in the money and the financials that are going to make a difference, but it becomes sustainable. That's what we did at Silicon Harlem. I started 8, 9 years ago. And ever since, they call me now. Because we sit in the middle and we were able to translate the language that all those 5 different voices came in. So I hope you embrace that wherever you are on earth, because I think it'll work.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll end with 3 quick things. So I think the first one is that there's a new palpable energy, I think, that's coming from the continent. And I think you just have to, I guess, open your social media these days. I'm sure from the crowd I'm seeing here that you probably follow something African-related. And you see how the presidents are speaking at the national events and international events. You see the discourse, you see the questions that are being asked are really starting to come to the fore, right? So you'll find where Kenya is taking a big lead when it comes to climate, right? So a lot of questions around how are we taking advantage of our ability to attract climate financing, because we are carbon negative. We don't emit a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. How are we taking advantage of the commitments? How are we taking advantage of the natural resources that we have? How are we taking advantage of renewables? There is so much. Everybody talks about the potential in Africa, and it continues to grow every time we move the next step. You're talking about the youth. Africa has most of these. You're talking about climate. We have we're carbon negative. You talk about women involved in SMEs. A lot of women are running SMEs, which are the largest businesses on the continent. So there's a lot of a new energy, and I feel like the governments are putting their money where their mouth is. And I think when it comes to understand, one thing I think there's an opportunity is understanding climate finance and helping companies and governments to understand what the opportunities are. So I think if any of you are working in that space, most businesses in Africa don't understand how to engage. And if you have that expertise, you can develop that expertise, you can really support them. 2 quick other things, I know you're pressuring me from the side, is Africans are starting to come together. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is really one of the most amazing things I think that is going to come out of the continent in the next few decades. African countries, most of you here are from Africa, we're all the countries are separate, right? We're not really connected. So even if I wanted to go to Morocco, I have to first fly to Europe and then get a flight from Europe to go to Morocco. If I want to go, to different countries, it's not that easy. And I have to fly. Driving is impossible. Rail is non-existent. But I think with the Africa Free Trade Agreement, there's a lot of these conversations that are starting to happen, and infrastructure being considered, and how are we going to trade with each other without using a third-party currency. And so those are really exciting conversations that I think as Africans we're starting to come together. We're talking about visa-free travel. I think my president was talking the other day about, everybody came from Kenya, so we're going to allow everybody to come to Kenya for free because it's home, everybody's Kenyan, right? So this kind of rhetoric. But I think it's important. I think the last one, which I think Ghana is doing really well, is really incorporating African Americans into this space and saying, let's come together and do business together. And it's not, before we were like, we're all Africans, we're all the same, and, we should band together. But I think the conversation has moved to an economic conversation. How can we do business together? I was at the African American Institute Gala the other day, and it was so wonderful to see everybody talking about the successes of African Americans and the successes of Africans and the successes of Africans in the diaspora, and talking about it in one unified voice. And that really gave me a lot of energy, and I think those are the things that really encourage me going forward.
Thank you. And Chinwe?
Thank you so much. So I've been in the fundraising space for about 16 years, and I can tell you that I cannot do my fundraising without good data. I can't stress enough the importance of collecting the right data and manipulating it. So, I had a discussion with a doctor a couple years ago who was visiting from Nigeria, and we started talking about the type of data he collects from his patients and their families, and it was basically non-existent. It was just like a folder that had a name an address, diagnosis, and that was it. And I said to him, if you go back, I told him what data points to try and collect. I said, if you go back, see if you can start collecting these data points. When you're ready, in about 2 or 3 years, I can sit down with you and we can start talking about a grateful patient or grateful family solutions, a grateful family program. I said, I can look at your data and I can predict the people that are more likely to make a planned gift, that are more likely to make a major gift. I can predict people who will give you money. I told him what kind of wealth indicators to collect. I told him what type of biographic and demographic information to collect. I haven't heard back from him, but I can't stress enough the importance of collecting data. You need data to tell your story. You need data to serve your clients, your customers. You need it to set your goals. You can calculate your return on investment. Again, you can use predictive modeling to determine people who are planned giving, major give prospects. Okay, so, and the last thing I like to talk about is legacy giving. So, which is also planned giving, right? People at this side of the continent or the world are beginning to leave name nonprofits in their wills. The easiest is to just name a nonprofit in your will so that to ensure that programs and services that you support continue beyond your lifetime. So for people on the continent, it might not be a right sell due to cultural, nuclear, extended family dynamics, but it has to start somewhere. And the best place to start the conversation on planned giving is through your board of directors. The board of directors at any company, any big organization, you can make sure that it gets to their board meeting agenda. When they are out on their retreat, talk about it. They can bring in a planned giving or legacy giving expert to come and talk about planned giving, but that conversation has to start somewhere.
Thank you very much. Well, I've enjoyed this panel, I must say, and I think a few points that have been very good is, well, we really need to make our voice heard, right? I hope everyone took down Clayton's five points here so that we can kind of put that into play and practice. But I really want to say that, you know, there's so much opportunity in Africa, and the diaspora is such a powerful, you know, tool to sort of push the continent forward and to solve some of our own problems. And I think there's multiple ways, as many of our panelists have discussed here, on how we can get involved. I think we should also take the opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves during networking, like how can we create some of those partnerships? How can we create some of those, ways in which we can, either give back, start foundations, put foundations in your will. That's an interesting one that I will, start to look into, or have my parents look into at least, right? There's so many ways to get involved, and I think that as we take the time to, connect with ourselves here, let's find those points of connections and partnerships. Well, that is it for this panel, and I thank you all for paying attention for this long. I know next, I think food is here, and I believe I see some hungry faces, so I would say that we're gonna take a quick little break here to grab some food, and then sit down, and we have one more panel, and then we're good to, start mingling and networking. So thank you very much.